You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 17th of May 2024 on Monocle Radio.
Brazil gets to grips with the effects and the causes of biblical flooding. New York City hosts one of the world's great design events, and why young Norwegians are wearing weird overalls. I'm Andrew Muller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. It's Friday, so it's our weekly in-house daily, and the Monocle staffers whose eggs fell earliest from their spoons were Fernando Augusto Pacheco, Chris Lord and Gunnar Gronlid. They will discuss the day's stuff, plus we'll be live at the Lviv Media Forum, and we'll meet the Greek artist Maria Mavropoulou and explore her embrace of AI. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller, and first to Lviv, where the annual Lviv Media Forum is underway. The country in which Lviv sits, Ukraine, has in the last couple of years especially found itself, for obvious and depressing reasons, something of a focus of discussion of how the media can adapt to covering 21st century conflict. Well, I'm joined now from Lviv by Olga Tokariuk, Ukrainian journalist, fellow at the Chatham House Leadership Academy and regular Monocle contributor. Olga, first of all, as regular listeners to the Daily, like we have any other kind, will be aware, you were on the show as recently as earlier this week. So, first of all, tell us a bit about how you got from here to where you are now, because it's still not a straightforward undertaking, is it?
Oh, it isn't, Andrew. Thank you for having me again. It was quite a nightmarish journey that I'm unlikely to repeat anytime soon, I must admit. So I had to fly to Warsaw from London, and then after spending several hours there, take an overnight train from Warsaw to the border. Basically, all night you're just traveling seated in a train that is constantly overheating, is very hot because it's a diesel train. That's the train that Polish railways have for going to the Ukrainian border. And then you reach Lviv in the morning completely exhausted. So I apologize, I can't stay with you longer than several minutes today.
I mean, it is, or at least it must be some consolation to arrive in Lviv, which is an absolutely gorgeous city. And I do recommend listeners visiting it once times are happier. But at the forum itself, what have been the main topics of discussion?
Yeah, well, there are actually faster ways to get to Lviv, so don't let the listeners who want to go now be, put off by my own experience. Just go to Krakow instead of Warsaw and go from there. It's faster and much more convenient. Lviv is gorgeous even now. It is relatively calm because it's Western Ukraine. There have been some missile attacks nearby, but the city mostly is spared, and obviously there are a lot of bomb shelters everywhere. And the Lviv Media Forum, actually, one of the two venues, at one of two stages of the main venue of the event was in the basement, and that's where I was also speaking. And at a stage in a basement, which seemed perfectly normal and very convenient and nice hall, packed, a lot of people, very nice. Just your regular event venue is just in the basement, something in new Ukrainian reality. Yeah, a lot of Ukrainian journalists and media professionals attended, and also many foreigners, actually, people coming from as far as Amsterdam, Sarajevo, and London, Oxford, and so on. And so the focus is, of course, on how Ukrainian journalists are faring, how they are struggling with all the mental health issues that arise from being a journalist in this country, but also being a citizen of this country. With, the access, whether they still are able to report freely in the situation of, war and the attempts of the government to have some control over the information space. And of course, all the issues, ethical issues that arise from reporting from the conflict zone.
You were speaking, I believe, on the subject of the importance of Ukraine's sense of humour in its current struggle. And for the last couple of years, that has been, I guess, a minor consolation that the Ukrainian sense of humour has attracted a global audience. It is something quite distinctive. How would you say it has been of importance to Ukraine over the last couple of years?
It was a unifying factor. It was, one of the ways Ukrainians demonstrated their resilience and their defiance, their courage, and, something surprising for many people outside of Ukraine, how Ukrainians were not able, not willing, not wanting to surrender, to back down, and started ridiculing the Russian army instead and, organizing this remarkable resistance effort. Now, more than 2 years into the war, I would say that there are maybe less jokes than there were initially, obviously for the reasons, people are tired, there are mounting losses, everybody knows someone who's been killed in this war, there is no end of war in sight. But I think Ukrainians still have not lost this ability to, make jokes and laugh even in dark times. And like coming to Ukraine every time actually gives me a lot of like energy and hope, something that I do not feel when I'm distant from Ukraine. I'm just reading what's happening in the news, but like actually being here, being among these people, seeing how resilient they are, how they just get on with their lives, how they are still optimistic that, this war will have a positive outcome for Ukraine is something really, really impressive. And that leaves an impression and allows me to go back to London and be productive there.
I mean, to return to the subject of the Lviv Media Forum, is there a consensus among Ukrainian journalists who are having to cover their own country's war about how good or otherwise a job foreign media are doing of covering it, especially since last October when everybody's attention got lured away by what was happening in the Middle East?
Yeah, I think there is a bit of disappointment that there is much less focus on Ukraine in the global media. There are still some journalists, correspondents in Ukraine who have been transferred from Moscow or other places, or, some global media open their offices in Kyiv and just put them up here from scratch, hiring new staff, recruiting some staff also among Ukrainian journalists who now work in these bureaus. So I think, there is like this sense of the focus is shifting elsewhere. So when international journalists are coming to events such as Lviv Media Forum and they are still or covering, talking about them like we are talking about this event now, I think that kind of gives Ukrainians some reassurance that the world has not forgotten about Ukraine, that it is still in the focus, that it is still important.
Olga Tokariuk in Lviv, thank you very much for joining us. You are listening to The Daily on Monocle Radio, and to Brazil now, specifically to its southernmost state, Rio Grande do Sul, which has been deluged these last couple of weeks by astonishing floods. At least 154 people are confirmed dead. More than 500,000 people have been forced to flee their homes. Hundreds, if not thousands, are still awaiting rescue. The barely calculable damage to infrastructure is known to include the collapse of at least one hydroelectric dam. Well, I'm joined in the studio by Monocle's senior correspondent, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Fernando, obviously this is a huge story back in your home country, but can you give us, the rest of us, the non-Brazilian listenership, a sense of the scale of these floods? Because Brazil is a very big country, so for Brazil to describe something as a very big flood, we are talking about a very big flood, right?
You're very right. I mean, it's every year we see news about floods, even in my own state, São Paulo. But this time, it's been devastating. And not only, we're not talking just about the number of deaths here, which is at the moment is 154. There's still a lot of people missing. But as you rightly said, I mean, there's over 540,000 people who had to temporarily move their houses. And 78,000 of them, they just lost their houses because of the floods. So there's no way they will not return to their homes. So at the moment, they're being rehoused by the government. And the thing is, Andrew, Rio Grande do Sul is a very important state to Brazil. It's a fairly wealthy state, I have to say. For example, they're the biggest rice producer in the country, and rice is one of the main staples of Brazilian cuisine. And these floods affected almost the whole state. The whole state has 497 municipalities. 461 of them have been affected. So it's the vast majority. And from what I can see, the rain continues. I mean, there's still a lot of kind of spots of rain here and there. So there was almost no time for the water to actually go down. So the whole country had to unite. And I think that's what's really happening right now.
I mean, I do know that there's a similar experience, I think, in Australia, that you can only be so prepared for a flood. An enormous wall of water will, by definition, overcome pretty much everything. But is there any grumbling about whether or not the state could have been better protected, could have been better prepared?
There is grumbling because perhaps there might be a little bit more further down the line, because now people are just worried about the donations. But for example, the capital of the state, Porto Alegre, they had a budget for anti-flooding measures. They basically spent 0 cent. I'm not joking. That's being reported in the newspapers against that. And that's, embarrassing. I mean, zero. I mean, there was no spending whatsoever in anything about anti-flooding. So there will be a lot of discussions about that, Andrew, for sure.
Hey, what are we seeing in terms of reaction from the federal government?
I think Lula is using this. I mean, he knows that Bolsonaro, perhaps during the COVID era, he was not very responsive. He was not really connecting to Brazilians in that sense. This is a national tragedy. So he's working very close to the governor of the state, Eduardo Leite, who is kind of center-right. So they're kind of from more or less polar opposites of the political spectrum. But at the moment, they're both working together. And even our biggest weekly magazine, Veja, the cover of the magazine is a wave of solidarity. I mean, and I have to say, Andrew, the whole country is united indeed, because it's been 2 weeks and is not getting any better. So a lot of the states, even the wealthier states like São Paulo, they're sending a lot of donations to the country. People are involved. I was talking to my mother yesterday. She was raising funds to send water to the state. So I can see that every single Brazilian, it can be a celebrity or even a Brazilian abroad, they are posting, they're asking people to donate. It's interesting. Perhaps that's the thing that unite the country that's been divided politically for quite a few years now.
I mean, does a disaster of this scale, though, change or, I guess, amplify the discussion in Brazil about climate change and the effect it may be having on Brazil? I mean, obviously this isn't the first time there has been a flood in Brazil, but it's certainly not the last big flood in recent times, and as you were saying, the scale of this one is extraordinary.
Yes, and it's not just about anti-flooding measures. I mean, that's one important thing, but they need to think about where are they going to build the structures of the city, because there is something about the state as well. Of course, I'm not a geographer here, but they are in a very complicated position as well, because that's where hot air and cold air, they meet. Is a very specific location. Don't count on me to explain to you the whole thing, but it's a very difficult location, and they will need to think about measures. But climate change is certainly going to be back on the table, and I think that's something that especially Lula's government, they care a little bit about. It's more than Bolsonaro, for sure.
Well, I was going to say that is a low bar, caring about climate change more than Bolsonaro, who of course preferred to pretend that none of it was actually happening. But is it something that, certainly when Lula ran to get his job back, was it something he talked about a lot? Did he try to establish that as a point of difference between himself and Bolsonaro?
For sure. But, we need more than that. We need more than just kind of nice words about the environment, because I think we saw that a lot with Lula, and it's good, let's change our image. We have a lovely environmental minister, Marina Silva, who knows about the cause, but it's not enough. I mean, we need a little bit more than that, and I think perhaps these floods will definitely open the discussion.
Well, just finally then, and to bring it back to, I guess, the real crux of this, which is the flood and the people it's affecting, are any of Brazil's meteorologists daring to take a punt on when the rain might actually stop?
Unfortunately not. And I'll give you an example, Andrew. Porto Alegre, which is a big city, I believe there are between 2 and 3 million people, their airport is still closed, and there's no way to predict when they're going to reopen. So the economy is being heavily affected, and the government and the local government as well said that they will, give money to people, especially for the ones that need the most, almost like we were in the COVID era. So we need those measures because it is a desperate situation.
Fernando Augusto Pacheco, thank you for joining us. You are listening to The Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller. Yesterday marked the start of NYC by Design, or Times Design, depending on how you pronounce the X. It's an annual festival across the Big Apple that runs until May 23rd. Monocle's US editor Chris Lord was at NYC by or Times Design Festival for us yesterday, but he is here right now in the studio in Midori House today. Chris, how jet-lagged are you?
Fresh from the plane, Andrew. I've just come straight from the plane to you to talk to you about this design festival.
Fresh from the plane is a contradiction in terms.
Maybe not so fresh, but anyway,
right,
yes.
You were at it yesterday. What is there to see?
So, first of all, NYC by Design, just to understand a little bit about what it is. It has quite a long history in New York of trying to bring together what was at a certain time a pretty small and nascent design scene, trying to energize galleries and get them excited and kind of come out, do all kind of synchronized shows at a certain thing, put on their best work and kind of give a big lift to it. I think what you've seen in the last couple of years is, firstly, that has worked. You now find, rather than it kind of being a sort of, slightly forgotten about bit of the calendar, it's become a really important part of that design scene. And I think what has happened with it is it's become a market moment. It's become a time when collectors come to New York for that period, when the galleries know that they're going to get a good market. They know that they're going to get an interesting bunch of collectors, curators coming through. And then in a way, what kind of crowns it now is that this weekend you have the International Contemporary Furniture Fair, which is really, it is probably America's biggest design show. It's very much a buyer's place. It's aimed at really architects and interior designers who are looking to sort of get some new collections through their work. Massive international thing. It stamps, I think, New York's ascendance really as the principal design city in America.
It's not easy to cause a massive fuss of any sort in New York City, of all places, but how big a thing is this event in New York?
Massive. I've run the length and breadth of Manhattan and Brooklyn in the last 2 days, Andrew. From the Brooklyn Metal Works, which is a place where people can learn how to work with metal. They've got a great show on at the moment of spoons done by the various designers who've been working there, which sounds underwhelming, but actually is really interesting and very good. Right through to, you go to Hudson Yards, which, Hudson Yards has had a troubled few years, really, a bit desolate it was. Well, not these last couple of days. You had massive big show by Muji, the big Japanese brand, bringing out some of their stuff. So you have a mix of sort of very local grassroots stuff, and then the brands kind of really get involved with it. And I think somewhere between the two is what the bit I find really interesting is the designers who live and work in New York City, who are really becoming household names around the world, still based there, opening up their studios, their showrooms, showing their work, brand new work. It is a very, very good event to get a good snapshot of where American design is at. And, there is no getting around the fact that what's happened in the last few years is you've gone from really having very, very few design galleries working in America that operate there to now you have really important global design gallery names, Future Perfect being one of them. They have energized that whole thing where now design sits on that, more or less on that same level as contemporary art, as a sort of go-to for people, frankly, with money to spend, who want to buy stuff that's going to accumulate value and be a collectible item.
Are there any noticeable trends as such? And I don't mean just in spoons, though if you do want to tell us what's happening in spoons, I, for one, would be agog to hear it. Because the thought occurs that what we're beginning to see now, I guess, is a result of the fact that for a couple of years quite recently, people spend a lot of time inside thinking about what their interior environment looks like. And certainly if my own experience was any guide, growing heartily sick of looking at it.
One person said to me that the colour of the moment, Andrew, is ox blood. She said there's so much ox blood around at this design fair and this design festival. So I don't know if you can really call that a trend. What I would say is I think that...
Is anyone doing an oxblood spoon?
Oh, there was actually an oxblood spoon. That was what made me think about it.
Outstanding.
But I think some of the things that you can, the sort of trend that you can draw, obviously design is very, very disparate, and I think there's not a movement happening there in America right now. But I think what you do see is you see more and more the world of contemporary art bleeding into quite a lot of design that sits in some of the big galleries that operate there. You see things that that are playful. You see things. I went to see two fantastic designers yesterday, Kai Williams and Chen worked together for probably about 14 years as a sort of duo, if you like. And what they are now working on, they've just opened this amazing new showroom studio, their huge space in Brooklyn. And you look at that work and it's really playful. It's like based on ceramics that are made in Pennsylvania since the 1700s. You've got this incredible sort of legacy of the nearby cemetery in Brooklyn. It's kind of, it's not, what I'm trying to say is it's not very interiorsy. It's fun. It's design with a kind of artistic sensibility that's playful and sometimes a bit chaotic and caustic, and that's very good. And I think just on a final point, Andrew, just to say is that what is interesting at the moment is there's some major headwinds for contemporary art. The UBS art report came out just a couple of months ago. Top end struggling, in the middle it's struggling a bit as well. Slow in sales because of what you just were talking about. People sat at home. They had a lot of money around for a while. Now that money is the picture is changing. People are not spending as they were coming out of the pandemic. Design so far seems to be weathering the storm, and there is still so much momentum that you can see on the streets of New York right now. And where I'm normally based in Los Angeles, quite bold of them, they launched another design fair just on the same day that New York City's Design Week kicks off in Los Angeles. So the market clearly is getting very busy and very crowded, and I think that is a sign that there is money being spent. I just do wonder a little bit as we get more and more of these events whether the market can keep the pace.
Now, this is exciting, though. It could become a regular segment on the Friday Daily. Chris Lord discusses a design fair while jet-lagged out of his mind.
I thought you were going to say discusses spoons.
And discusses spoons while jet-lagged out of his mind. And he's still better at saying two-syllable words like jet-lagged than I am. And I've had a night's sleep. Chris Lord, Monocle's US editor, thank you for joining us. This is the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily with me, Andrew Muller, and a happy, if not downright ecstatic, Constitution Day to our many Norwegian listeners, and indeed to our researcher Gunnar Gronlid, who is here to walk us through it, as well as the culmination of a peculiar month-long coming-of-age graduation tradition. I'm just reading this out. He may be making it all up. It says known as russ. Gunnar, first of all, seriously, happy Constitution Day. How does a Norwegian abroad celebrate Constitution Day?
Yeah, on the 17th of May, basically the entire country just gets dressed in the traditional bunad outfit, which is, nice and red, loads of silvery things on it and all that. And we go out.
As you're wearing now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
A bit disappointed that you're not wearing it. I asked you before, but, it's okay. And so we go out into the street and we parade for most of the early parts of the day. Then we get together and we just eat hot dogs, waffle, ice cream, and the kids play playground games.
Is the hot dogs and waffle thing actually mandated in the Constitution, or has this been a more later amendment?
I'm pretty sure it's mandated. I think so. It feels that way.
But you did discover in your meticulous research a fun fact about the Constitution of Norway, which was a bit of a surprise to me, to be honest.
It was a surprise to me too. I didn't know it. It turns out that the Norwegian Constitution is the second oldest written constitution still in use today, second only to the United States.
We did run through a few possible alternatives to that, but so far, unless one of our listeners knows better, and believe me, they'll tell us if they do, that does seem to be the case. We did want to talk as well, though, about this thing called russ, where people graduate from various institutes of education and, as I understand it, wear strange overalls and listen to bad music.
That's exactly right. So in 1905, this tradition started. So that's the same year that Norway split up from its union with Sweden. And it is a month-long graduation tradition where Norwegian students who are graduating and are about to embark into adult life are celebrating that they can finally drink and finally drive. And so they all get together, they put on these red overalls, or if they studied a different subject like electrical engineering or mechanics, you might wear blue or black overalls.
What colour overalls did you wear?
I wore red.
Okay.
I wore red. And so then you get together in groups, you give it a name. If you have a bit of money, you might buy a bus together that you then paint and give a name. And then, the reason why we're here, if you have a lot of money, you might pay a music producer to produce you a party song that will compete with the rest of the country for the hit lists. And that's what we're going to listen to today. That's what I
was
brought
just going
you.
to say, and if you have even more money, you might pay Norwegian musicians not to make any music. Just before we get on to that, though, why did this start in 1905 upon liberation from the Swedish yoke? Were the Swedes specifically preventing Norwegians from wearing strange overalls and listening to terrible popular music?
Well, the music part definitely came later, and I think the buses and things like that also came later.
Wouldn't have been a thing in 1905.
No. Where it started was, which I forgot to mention, actually, it started with the wearing of the russ cap.
Okay.
Which, it's just like a nice cap with a little thread on the end, and you'll often write in a Sharpie the nickname, so everyone gets a nickname as well.
Okay.
There's too many aspects. Mine was Humphrey from Gossip Girl, which I've never watched, but that's what I got, and I don't know what that means. I don't know if it's an insult or a compliment. No one's ever told me, but that was mine, yeah.
In an Australian context, I don't know if you were given the nickname by an Australian, there is a bafflingly popular long-running children's TV character called Humphrey B. Bear, who is not actually a bear, it's an unemployable actor in a bear costume. But it is or was a thing for many years.
Maybe that's what they actually meant.
It may have been. I think you are at this point putting this off. You have warned me, and I will pass that warning on to our listeners, that what we are about to hear is suboptimal.
Yeah, to be perfectly honest, I suggested this in order to torture you, and then I hadn't listened to any of these songs in 8 years since I was a Russ myself, and I forgot how awful they are. So all I'll say is, Andrew, if you weren't convinced by the superior musical heritage of Norway before, then you certainly won't be now.
So we were going to start by playing a clip of, this is one of this year's songs?
Yeah, this is, as far as I know, this is the top hit song of this year.
Okay, let's hear it. That does absolutely blow. So what would have happened there was that a bunch of Norwegian students would have got together, pooled their resources and paid somebody to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and do these songs become popular beyond the peer group who commissioned them? Do they become breakout hits?
They do. Sometimes if you go to random house parties and things like that in Norway, even if you're way above the Russ age, you will hear them show up. And then you will especially hear the next song we're about to hear, which is the top Russ song of all time.
What year roughly did this emerge?
That was in 2015. So actually all the songs, they have the year on them. So the one we just heard, I don't really want to say it because they're all horrible. It's called Poli Tits 2024. And now we're about to hear Shaken 2015, which means the shake.
Okay, we will get to that shortly, but for the benefit of our listeners whose Norwegian may not be all it should be, are you able to break down the lyrical subtexts of Polly Tits?
For the sake of my career, I really don't want to be honest. It's basically just about female police officers in the most sexist possible way you can imagine.
Okay, a philosophical work then. And this is the all-time classic, you said, from 2015?
That's right.
See, I do listen. Can you tell us a bit about this one?
Well, this one was done, in fact, a very fun fact, it was done by one of the artists is NYCxDesign, who ended up representing Norway in Eurovision 2021.
How'd they do?
I'm pretty sure they lost pretty hard. I can't actually remember.
Can't have been as bad as this year, though.
No, definitely not. By definition, it could not have been. But this year's song was better than that one. I did listen back to it, and this year's worst track of Eurovision was still better than that.
Okay.
And it has, by the way, 35.5 million listens on Spotify at the moment, the song we're about to hear.
Okay, let's hear it. Ever a more innocent prelapsarian age in which the Roos songs were not horrendous nosebleed auto-tune?
I think from what I remember, it started getting really awful around the time that I started. So before that, the producing songs thing, I think, came later on. But I'm pretty sure as soon as it started, it was pretty awful right from the get-go.
Well, on that cheerful note, we will nevertheless reiterate Constitution Day greetings to Norway and to our Norwegian listeners. Gunnar Gronlid, thank you for joining us. Finally, on today's show, we're heading to Athens and to the contemporary artist Maria Mavropoulou, whose series Imagined Images uses AI to create the family album that she never had. Monocle's Lily Austin spoke to her about the surprises that emerged through the project and the role she has found for this controversial technology in the visual arts.
I was born in Tashkent, Uzbekistan, and I didn't have a single photo of that house. And I never thought how the houses there are. I mean, I would imagine a house that would resemble the one I live now. But when I started asking the AI to create images of a house in that specific town in that time in the 90s, I was astonished that there is a specific architectural style, and the garden is kind of walled gardens inside the houses. And when I asked my mom to choose which image looked more like the house they lived in, and she was also started crying. She was like saying, "I can't believe that." Wow. But there is kind of truth in those images, although we call them like fake images.
Maria Mavropoulou's series, Imagined Images, is made up of 150 photographs, the type found in photo albums the world over. Going back 4 generations, we see sepia portraits of men in 1920s suits, black and white photographs of multi-generational dinners round heaving tables, and holiday snaps on the beach, seemingly from the 80s and 90s, overexposed in the beating sun.
I started working on this series from early 2022, when the first AI image generators were online. So I was thinking which is the most familiar or more intimate images that we have. And I couldn't think anything else than a family photo album. So since I didn't have really one, because my relatives have been moving from country to country many times, I thought that would make a nice project to start making images out of the stories that I have been told from my grandmother and my grandfather and my parents about their life before settling in Greece.
Looking at this series, you see the conventions of the family album emerge. There are the formal photographs, the wedding pictures, class photos, family portraits, and some celebratory, poses in front of a new car, a new home, a new baby.
I was really into seeing what is that construction of a family photo album, from where we get our sense of self also, and recreate the memories from the images usually.
Mavropoulou intentionally created a typical family album, and yet there were some surprises.
It was a very, I would say, touching process. I would discover things I didn't know about my parents' life. For example, my mother, she's a chemist engineer, so I never thought she was wearing a work uniform working in the factory she was working. And when all the images I would get from the AI were women in their 30s with work uniform, I asked her, "Mom, did you wear a uniform?" She said, "Yeah, of course." But it's a small detail I had never thought about. And going through that process, revealed things.
As well as a visual artist, Mavropoulou is a photojournalist, documenting Greece for global publications. So on the one hand, she uses photography to record fact, but on the other, uses it in the artistic space to create fiction.
I was always interested in how images inform the way that we understand the world. So having that knowledge and working in those two fields makes me just understand better how images can function. And I should also say that I was trained as a painter. So I went to the art school in Athens and I painted for many, many years. And I was always trying to achieve a photorealistic result in painting. So I kind of understand how an image is constructed in multiple ways.
While AI is generally met with skepticism by the art world, Mavropoulou has a different perspective.
I usually see those images, AI images, being closer to painting as a mindset than to photography, because they are generated images, just as painting is a generated image, but it's generated from the mind of an artist. Here we use the AI, kind of collective consciousness, to create those images. So it's a collaboration between the human mind and the, machine mind. It functions really as a mirror of society. All our biases or all our ideas are embedded in the way those tools function.
As is the case with most AI-generated images, at least for the time being, most of the pictures in this series are somewhat warped. Physical features seem to be the hardest to replicate. Faces are smudged, and fingers melt into the laps they rest on.
The images in the series are uncanny and kind of distorted, but this is part of the technology that we have today. Soon they won't be. So I was really interested to explore the abilities of those tools, the AI image generators, upfront before they become actually indistinguishable from actual photographs.
The distortion of the images is useful. It reminds us that the series is a construction. It is not looking to trick us into believing the images are real, but inviting us to think about the ways in which the family album itself is a construct, used to create memories and shape identities, one that is perhaps now a relic of the last century. You've exhibited in Milan and recently in New York. What has the reception been to the series, and has that varied at all in different cities?
Well, the funny thing is that people actually relate with those images. They look through the photo album and they say, this reminds me of that time when I was with my parents. This reminds me of that. So these fake images actually evoke feelings in them. And that's the most important thing for me. It seems like it's like my family album, but it's not. It's nobody's. I mean, it's everybody's and nobody's at the same time. And that made me think more about what really is an image. It's like an anchor to a memory.
That was Lily Austin talking to Maria Mavropoulou, her series Imagined Images is exhibited at MoMUS in Athens from today and at the Bangkok Arts and Culture Centre from the end of this month. That is all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our guests Olga Tokariuk, Fernando Augusto Pacheco, Chris Lord and Gunnar Gronlid. Today's show was produced by Chris Chermak and researched by Gunnar Gronlid. Our sound engineer was Flynn Simons with editing assistance from Lily Austin. I'm Andrew Muller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time on Monday. Thanks for listening and have a great weekend.